26 days at sea. Around 15,000 sheep and cattle from WA farms stranded on a ship floating off Fremantle as Perth swelters through a heatwave.
Knee-deep in their own waste with high ammonia levels, poor ventilation, they're stressed, fatigued.
The sheep are comfortable, they're content, they're well fed, they're fat and they're clean.
The MV Bahija had been bound for Jordan before it was ordered by the government to turn back 11 days ago due to security concerns in the conflict-ridden Red Sea. But when it returned, biosecurity concerns meant there was nowhere for the livestock to go.
While they do clean it as well as they can, there is still some risk that disease could come back off that ship onto land.
Calls have been growing for the government to let the sheep off the ship. But the exporter has applied to offload some of the animals before heading back with the rest on a safer but much longer route, a 33-day voyage around South Africa.
The initial voyage was supposed to be 15 days, and now what is being contemplated is a 60-day voyage for 14,000 sheep on a stinking hot and literally stinking metal vessel.
It's a very short-sighted view of the animal activist because the actual stress points for the animals is loading and unloading. They're content where they are. Let's leave it at that.
Last year, the federal government pledged to halt the live sheep export trade, but a date for the phase-out is yet to be set.
We're absolutely living up to our commitment, remembering it's worth less than 0.1% of Australia's agricultural output. It is virtually defunct.
In the meantime, the fate of the animals hangs in the balance as authorities scramble to figure out what to do next.
Government's had, 12 days to figure this out. Where's the plan? We haven't heard anything.
Dr. Susie Fowler is the RSPCA's Chief Science Officer. Susie, we just heard the government is now considering the exporter's plan, which is to offload sick livestock and then re-export the rest of them via a longer route. What's your response to that plan?
Yeah, that's a horrific plan from our perspective. The animals are no doubt already suffering, and to consider putting them on the ship or leaving them on the ship for another 30 plus days on an even longer journey is definitely not in the best interest of those animals. We
say they're no doubt suffering. There is, however, a registered vet on board who says there are no significant welfare concerns at this point. So do we know there's even a problem?
Yeah, so there is an AAV on board, which is an industry paid for vet. We have been calling for independent vets to get on board that ship, and we're really hoping that that's happening today to do an assessment. But just because there's no significant illness or overt signs of animals dying on the ship doesn't mean that their welfare isn't compromised. The evidence is really clear and the science is really obvious that these animals will be suffering after 26 days at sea for a number of reasons, and not the least of which is the fatigue and stress that these animals are now experiencing is going to put them at a greater risk of disease in the coming days.
Dr. Susie, one of the main reasons being given for keeping the livestock on the ship is due to biosecurity risks. Aren't they valid concerns?
So we do acknowledge the biosecurity concerns that have been raised, but the simple fact that they're suggesting to take the sickest animals off the ship tells me that they've assessed that biosecurity risk and said that it's very low. We know the ship hasn't actually been anywhere near any other ports and hasn't accepted any feed or stock from anywhere else in the world. It's literally been out at sea where even insects aren't really a high risk. And so the biosecurity risk, as we understand it, is negligible and can be managed here on Australian shores.
What are the conditions like for livestock on these kind of ships?
Yeah, so they're pretty horrific conditions, even in the best of circumstances. Even if these animals had only been exported for 15 or 18 days as initially intended. We know the sheep, their pens don't get cleaned out during the export journey. And so they're standing in their own faeces and waste over that time, which only accumulates and no doubt is getting very bad now. That then releases ammonia, so that irritates their eyes and their respiratory tract. The stress of the rocking and rolling of the ship, being mixed with unknown sheep that they're not familiar with, and just that cumulative stress brings about risks of respiratory disease, gastrointestinal disease, and the fact that they just can't cope anymore.
Now, the Farmers Federation say a feedlot on water compared to a feedlot on land is no different, and it's the transporting of the animals that actually causes them stress. If that's the case, aren't they better off on the boat?
We're horrified by that analogy, and we don't think that that's a fair comparison to make at all. It's just disgusting to think that the industry are trying to make those comparisons. There might be welfare concerns on feedlots, but I can tell you the welfare concerns of animals being on a live sheep export ship is much worse. And in fact, if he's saying that transport is bad for the animals, then a live sheep export vessel is a form of transportation that is even worse.
Thanks so much for your time, Dr. Fowler. Appreciate it.
Thank you.